My sister told everyone I'm jealous of her. Then I learned she was pregnant with my husband's child. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together, we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. They say that jealousy is a color green, according to the poets. But jealousy never actually had a color in my life. It had a smell. It smelled like my sister's perfume. I should start earlier. I should explain how it happened, how two people who were supposed to matter most to me managed to become strangers wearing familiar faces. But the beginning is complicated, and the middle is where all the real damage lives. So I'll start with what I know now, and work backward into what I wish I'd never had to learn. My sister's name was Elena. We shared a childhood, which sounds simple until you understand what that actually means. It means we shared a bedroom for 18 years, that we learned to be human together, that we knew each other's secrets before we knew our own. She was 2 years older, which gave her the exact right amount of authority to feel like a protector, and the exact right amount of vulnerability to feel like someone I needed to protect. Our mother used to say we were halves of the same person. Where one goes, the other follows, she would tell people at dinner parties, as if this was charming rather than predictive of every tragedy that was to come. We had matching diaries as children. We had a language, not a real language, just a collection of words and inflections that only made sense between us. We promised things to each other with the kind of absolute certainty that only children possess, the kind where you can't imagine a future where those promises wouldn't hold. We promised that we would never let anyone come between us. We promised that we would always choose each other. We promised 1,000 things that sound beautiful in the mouth of an 8-year-old and become increasingly difficult to keep as you approach adulthood. But we kept them. Or at least, I thought we did. When I met David, I was 26. He was a friend of a colleague, introduced at the kind of work party where you go to be seen and leave before anything interesting happens. He wasn't the most handsome man in the room, but he was the kind of present, really, genuinely present, that made you feel like you were the only person worth paying attention to. He remembered things I said. He asked follow-up questions. He looked at me like I was a book he was excited to read. I brought him to Sunday dinner 2 months later. My mother made her famous lasagna. Elena set the table with extra care, the kind that suggested she was preparing for judgment. She wore a new dress blue, the color of her eyes, which had always been brighter than mine, and she laughed at his jokes with a generosity I only later understood was strategic. "He's perfect for you," she said afterward, when she helped me with the dishes. "I mean, genuinely, I've never seen you like this." I believed her. She was my sister. Why wouldn't I believe her? We got married 6 months later. Small wedding, immediate family only, at the botanical garden that Elena had always loved. She was my maid of honor. She gave a speech about how she'd never seen me happier, how she was gaining a brother, how she hoped David understood what a treasure he was marrying. David cried during that speech. I remember watching the tears move down his face and thinking how beautiful it was that he felt so moved by her words. I was so stupid. Not stupid in the way that people use the word carelessly, as an insult. Stupid in the most literal sense, lacking the capacity to perceive what was directly in front of me. Stupid like someone who walks through a door that's clearly marked danger and acts surprised when they get hurt. The first year was good, genuinely good. We found a house, a small townhouse with potential, David said, and we began the slow process of making it ours. Elena helped us paint. She came over on weekends, and the three of us would work side by side, laughing, listening to music, passing brushes back and forth. She had always been handy, more practical than me, better with physical tasks. She knew how to fix things. David would ask her advice about the plumbing, the electrical work, the structural decisions that came with the territory of owning an old house. She came over more and more. At first, it seemed natural. She was family. She was welcome. She had a key, which David insisted she should have, for emergencies. She would let herself in. She knew where we kept the spare glasses. She knew the password to the Wi-Fi. She knew us in the way that only people who spend significant time in your home can know you. She knew when we ran out of milk, when the coffee maker was broken, when we'd had a fight because we weren't speaking to each other at breakfast. But something was shifting. I was aware of it in the way you're aware of a light. You forgot to turn off, not immediately noticeable, but nagging at the edges of your consciousness. David and Elena began to share inside jokes. This is something that happens in any marriage, where you introduce your spouse to your family, so I tried not to make too much of it. But inside jokes can be bonding, or they can be excluding, and I began to notice which category theirs fell into. They would exchange glances during dinner. Elena would know what David wanted before he asked. They had a rhythm together that felt practiced, rehearsed, like they were dancers performing a choreography only they knew. I mentioned it to David once. Carefully, the way you bring up something you're aware is probably nothing but you need to say anyway. Don't you think Elena comes over too much? I asked. He was reading, sprawled on the couch with his feet up, the picture of casual comfort. Your sister? No, I like Elena. She's easy to be around, and she helps with the house. You should be grateful you have family who cares that much. I felt small when he said it. Ungrateful. Suspicious of something I couldn't quite name. That's when the rumors started. I don't remember who told me first. It might have been my colleague, Rachel, who pulled me aside at work with the kind of expression people use when they're about to deliver bad news. It might have been my mother, who called me in the evening with the careful tone of someone speaking to an invalid. It might have been someone at the grocery store, a distant acquaintance, someone who barely knew me but felt entitled to commentary on my life. Your sister said something interesting about you, the voice would always begin. And then, she said you're jealous of her. She said you've always been competitive. She said she tries to be close to you, but you push her away. The words didn't make sense. I wasn't jealous of Elena. I'd never been jealous of Elena. We had different lives, different styles, different everything. There was nothing to be jealous of. But the more I heard these things, the more I began to doubt my own memory. Maybe I was jealous and just didn't realize it. Maybe that's what this discomfort I'd been feeling was actually about, not infidelity, not betrayal, but simple, petty envy. I became someone different. I pulled away from Elena. I made excuses when she called. When she came over unannounced, I was cold. I created distance where there had only been closeness. And she responded to this distance with a kind of hurt that seemed so genuine, so real, that I began to feel like the villain in our own narrative. Why are you treating me like this? She asked me once, standing in my kitchen, her eyes bright with manufactured tears. I've only ever tried to help you. I've only ever been there for you, and you treat me like I'm some kind of threat. The word hung in the air between us. Threat. I'm not, I said, and I meant it. I'm sorry, I'm just stressed. I know you are, she said, and she came and hugged me, and I smelled her perfume jasmine and something sweet, something I'd smelled on David's clothes more times than I could count, and I thought maybe I was losing my mind. David was supportive through all of this. He told me I was being paranoid. He told me I needed to work on my relationship with my sister, that family was important, that I should try to see things from her perspective. He was patient with me in the way that people are patient with someone they've decided is unreasonable. Looking back, I can see that the patience itself was a weapon. It made me doubt myself more thoroughly than any cruelty ever could have. I started going to therapy. I sat in a beige office with a woman named Patricia who listened to me talk about my jealousy, my insecurity, my complicated relationship with my sister. I told her about the rumors. I told her about my feelings of being excluded. I told her that I felt like something was wrong, but I couldn't quite articulate what. Do you think there's something between your husband and your sister? Patricia asked me once. I laughed. I actually laughed. No, I said. That's impossible. They're family, and I know David. He's not like that. But the thought, once planted, began to grow. It developed roots. It sent out shoots in the darkness of my mind, and I began to look for evidence that I'd previously been too blind to see. The late meetings at work that David attended with Elena, the way they texted each other, casual messages that seemed innocent on the surface but took on different meanings when you began to interpret them as code. The changed password on David's phone, something he said he did because of security concerns, but which happened right after I'd asked to use it to check the weather. I began to track his location. I told myself it was just casual curiosity, just a check-in here and there. But it became obsessive. I would check his phone data 3, 4, 5 times a day. I would see him at work when he said he was at work. I would see him at the grocery store when he said he was at the grocery store. Everything seemed to check out. Except for the afternoons when his phone moved to my sister's apartment. There were 12 of them over the course of 3 months. 12 times when David's phone pinged from Elena's address for between 40 minutes and 2 hours. I documented each one. I created a spreadsheet, which is the kind of thing that only seems reasonable when you're in the depths of psychological crisis. I told myself I was being thorough. I told myself I was being smart. I told myself I was protecting myself from something I still wasn't brave enough to fully believe. And then, on a Tuesday in March, my sister called me. "I need to tell you something," she said, and her voice was different. It was heavy with something I couldn't identify. "Can I come over?" She sat on my couch, the same couch where David liked to read, where Elena had become more familiar than I was in my own home, and she looked at her hands like they were more interesting than anything else in the world. "I'm pregnant," she said. The words didn't initially compute. I heard them. I understood their meaning individually, but as a sentence, they seemed to exist in a language I didn't speak. "Congratulations," I said automatically. "Who's the father?" She looked up at me then, and in her eyes I saw something that looked like apology and defiance simultaneously, which was the first time I understood that both emotions could exist in the same human heart at the same time. "David," she said. I think I asked her to repeat it. I think I laughed. I think I did a lot of things that felt appropriate to a moment of profound shock, but I can't actually remember them because my mind had gone somewhere else. It had traveled backward through time and was busy rewriting every moment that had led to this one, inserting new meanings into old memories, understanding finally what all the evidence had been trying to tell me. "How long?" I asked. 3 months, she said. 3 months. So she had become pregnant while I was still believing that my jealousy was the problem, while I was paying a therapist to help me accept my own paranoia, while I was watching David sleep and trying to convince myself that the man I'd married couldn't possibly be capable of this kind of betrayal. "Does he know?" "I told him last week. He wanted to tell you together." "How generous," I said, and I heard my own voice as if from a distance. It sounded calm. It sounded reasonable. It sounded like a person who hadn't just had their entire understanding of reality shattered into pieces too small to reassemble. "I'm sorry," Elena said, and the apology was genuine enough that it made everything worse. "I'm so sorry. I never meant for this to happen. It happened. And I couldn't stop it. And the more it happened, the more I felt like I had to lie. And I hated lying to you. But I hated the truth more, so I just kept pretending. And I told everyone you were jealous so they wouldn't suspect anything. And it worked. And I hated myself every single day for how good it worked." I asked her to leave. I called David at work and told him to come home early. I did not tell him why. I wanted to give him the gift of hope, the hope that nothing was wrong, that his day would proceed normally, that he would arrive at our house, and his life would still be intact. I wanted him to have approximately 45 minutes of not knowing that everything had changed. It seemed like a mercy. When he arrived, I had the documents prepared. I'd gone to a lawyer 3 days before, finding out I was right to be paranoid, which is one of those tragic ironies that life occasionally hands you. The lawyer had asked me why I wanted the paperwork drawn up if I wasn't certain of anything. I told him I had a feeling. He told me that feelings were legally insufficient. I told him to proceed anyway. The three of us sat in the living room, the room I'd decorated, the room with the furniture I'd chosen, the room that contained evidence of a life I'd built that no longer existed. David and Elena sat on the couch. I sat in the chair across from them. "I know about the baby," I said to Elena. Then I turned to David. "I know about you and my sister." David began to speak, but I held up my hand. "I'm not interested in explanations. I'm not interested in your justifications, or your apologies, or your carefully constructed narratives about how this happened, and it's not as bad as it sounds. I know exactly how bad it is. I know precisely how bad it is, because it's exactly as bad as it sounds." I placed the divorce papers on the coffee table. They made a soft sound as they landed, the sound of something fragile being set down carefully. "These are already prepared. They've been reviewed by my lawyer. All you need to do is sign them. I've been as generous as I can afford to be. You can keep the house, David. I'll take my things. I don't want anything from you except for this marriage to be over." He stared at the papers like they were written in a language he didn't understand. "I don't want a divorce," he said. "I want to fix this." I looked at him, really looked at him, and I realized that I didn't know him at all. This man sitting on my couch was a stranger. He was someone who wore my husband's face, but was not my husband. My husband didn't exist. He had never existed. I had invented him out of the raw materials of hope and desperation, and now I was finally seeing the real person beneath that invention. "I'm not angry," I said, which was the truest thing I could tell him. "I'm not even hurt, not really. I'm just finished. I'm finished with you. I'm finished with this. I'm finished with the life I thought I was building." Elena was crying. I looked at her, and I tried to feel something: anger, hurt, betrayal, all the things I felt like I was supposed to feel, but mostly what I felt was a kind of relief. The uncertainty was gone. I didn't have to wonder anymore. I didn't have to question my own perception of reality. I had been right all along, and that rightness was a strange comfort. "Why?" she asked. "Why are you being so calm? Why aren't you screaming?" "Because screaming won't change anything," I said. "Because anger is a response to someone you still believe in, and I don't believe in either of you anymore. You're just people who made choices, and I'm just a person who now gets to make different choices." I left the house that evening with a single suitcase in my car. I stayed at a hotel for the first few nights, in a room that smelled like industrial cleaning supplies and the absence of memory. I didn't cry. I didn't sleep well. I sat in the dark and tried to reconstruct the narrative of my own life, tried to figure out where I'd gone wrong, tried to locate the moment where everything had started to decay. The thing about betrayal is that it's not a single event. It's an accumulation. It's every moment of not asking the right questions, every time you ignore an instinct, every choice you make to believe the people you love, rather than the evidence in front of your eyes. I had done all of those things, and I had done them knowingly. Some part of me had always suspected. Some part of me had known. And I had chosen not to know, which is its own kind of betrayal. I got an apartment. I started going back to my therapist. But I didn't talk about jealousy anymore. We talked about boundaries. We talked about the difference between loyalty and blindness. We talked about the ways that love can make you into a person you don't recognize. My mother called me every other day. She was angry in the way that mothers get when their children are hurt. Not at the people who hurt us, but at us for allowing ourselves to be hurt. "You were too trusting," she said, which might have been the most useless piece of advice anyone has ever given me. What was I supposed to do? Be less trusting? Suspect everyone of infidelity? Live my life in a constant state of paranoia and doubt? I was just normal, I told her. I believed the people I loved. That's not a character flaw. But I understood what she meant. I understood that kindness and trust can be liabilities. I understood that the world punishes goodness in ways that are not proportional to the sin. I understood that sometimes you can do everything right and still end up exactly where you started alone. 2 months after I left, Elena sent me a letter. I didn't open it immediately. I let it sit on my kitchen counter for 3 days, watching it like it might explode if I touched it. When I finally did open it, it was long, several pages in her handwriting, the same handwriting that had filled my childhood, with notes passed between desks in school, with secrets written in diaries, with promises made and made again. "I don't expect you to forgive me," she wrote. "I don't even expect you to read this letter. But I need you to know that what I did wasn't about you. It wasn't about jealousy or competition or any of the things I told everyone. It was about me being broken in a way I didn't know how to fix. It was about me feeling invisible my entire life, and David made me feel visible for the first time. It was about wanting something so badly that I was willing to destroy everything to get it. It was about being selfish and cruel and not caring about the consequences because I was too focused on my own needs," she went on. She explained the details of how it started, an accidental moment of physical contact, a moment of tension that escalated, a series of choices made and remade and made again, until the line between possible and impossible had been completely erased. She wrote about her pregnancy with a kind of wonder that was almost unbearable to read, the wonder of a woman who was going to have something of David's, something permanent, something that would tie them together forever. "I know this doesn't make it better," she wrote, "but I wanted you to know that I loved him, that it wasn't just lust or mistake or a moment of weakness. I actually loved him, and maybe that's worse than if it had been casual. I don't know." I burned the letter. I don't know why. Some kind of ritual, I suppose. Some way of trying to destroy the words so I wouldn't have to continue hearing them in my head. A year later, Elna had a daughter. My sister had a daughter, and I didn't go to the hospital. My mother went, and she came back telling me about how beautiful the baby was, how much she looked like David, how this was a tragedy for everyone involved. But I didn't go. I couldn't. I couldn't be in a room with evidence of my husband's infidelity made flesh. I couldn't look at that baby and not feel the specific kind of pain that comes from understanding that someone you love will be forever bound to someone you used to love through a third person who shouldn't exist. I began to rebuild. Slowly, methodically, like someone putting together a house after a disaster. I dated. I didn't trust easily, but I dated. I went to therapy. I read books about betrayal and resilience and the ways that trauma reshapes your neurology. I became someone new, or perhaps I became someone who had always existed underneath the person I'd been pretending to be. The thing I discovered is that liberation tastes like loneliness at first. It tastes like the specific kind of freedom that comes from having nothing left to lose. It tastes like the understanding that the people you trusted the most are just people, just humans capable of making terrible choices, just creatures shaped by their own wounds and limitations. I ran into David at a coffee shop 2 years after we separated. He was alone. We made awkward small talk about nothing important. He told me he was happy. He told me he and Elena had gotten married. He told me I looked good, and I could see him trying to figure out if there was a way to make this encounter mean something redemptive, something that could retroactively change the narrative of our relationship. "I'm glad you're happy," I told him, and I meant it. Not because I wanted his happiness, but because his happiness was no longer my responsibility. His choices were no longer my problem. His life had become something that existed parallel to mine, rather than intersecting with it. "Are you happy?" he asked. I considered the question. Was I happy? Or was I just less broken than I used to be? Was happiness even the right metric for measuring a life that had been this thoroughly altered? "I'm content," I said finally. "I'm living a life that belongs to me. That's better than happiness. That's everything." He nodded, and I could see him understanding for perhaps the first time that I wasn't hurt anymore, that his betrayal had had an expiration date, that he had been given a finite amount of real estate in my psyche, and he had used up all of it. Sometimes I think about calling my sister. Not often, and not seriously, but sometimes. I think about what I would say. I think about whether there's any amount of time that could heal what was broken between us. I think about whether forgiveness is something she's owed or something she would have to build on her own. But mostly I don't think about them at all. I've learned that the most powerful thing you can do in response to betrayal is to become someone so complete unto yourself that the betrayal becomes irrelevant. I've learned that living well is, in fact, the best revenge. Not because it hurts them, but because it heals you. They say that jealousy is a color, but I think they're wrong. I think betrayal is the color, and I've learned to see it now. I see it in the small moments, in the way someone glances away, in the hesitation before they answer a question, in the specific tone they use when they're about to lie. I see it, and I make choices accordingly. I trust, but carefully. I love, but with eyes open. And I've discovered something unexpected, that knowledge itself can be a kind of freedom. To know what people are capable of, to know what I'm capable of surviving, to know that I can stand at the edge of the abyss and not fall in. That's the real gift that came from all of this. Not wisdom exactly, not strength, though I have that too, but the understanding that I am not fragile, that I can be broken and still become whole, that sometimes the people who hurt us are actually giving us the gift of clarity, the gift of knowing exactly who we are when everything else is stripped away. And that gift, in the end, is worth far more than the life I thought I was building with people who were never really there.